fault versus coverage.
Yes.
So let's say there is that water loss. The loss occurs. It was determined that the fault was in the supply line. There's inside of the unit, an element for which the unit owner is responsible. What would you caution boards against doing next?
So this is the type of narrative that I typically hear from the association's elected leadership, the board of directors. And I think they don't really understand the nature of the insurance product and who the intended beneficiary of this product is, because that's what it really is, right? Insurance is a product that mitigates risk for the association. We purchase that product, especially for the types of risk that we can't mitigate through other means. So just because, and this is the issue, just because a homeowner is supposed to maintain an item, let's say in this case it's the toilet supply line, and that fails. Well, we are operating under a walls-in policy, for example, right? The association's insurance carrier provides coverage not only for damage to the common area, but to the interior of the unit. The elected leadership, the board of directors, and the community manager might say, well, why should we file a claim against, quote unquote, our policy, meaning the association's policy, when it was the owner's fault? It was their supply line that failed. And then I have to turn and say, okay, define what our policy means, the association's policy. How do the premiums for the association's policy get paid? Where do you get that money? We get it from the assessments. Well, who's paying those assessments? The homeowners are. The homeowners are paying as intended beneficiaries of this policy. So regardless of whose quote unquote fault it is, in our experience, I think you gentlemen would agree, from the carrier standpoint, they don't care necessarily when they're adjusting the property loss whose fault it is. They only care about whether or not the product that was purchased by the association provides coverage for it. So if the homeowner was a bonehead and didn't maintain their supply line, or let's say they were doing a bathroom remodel and did something wrong, and now there's a claim, the association cannot justifiably, in my opinion, deny the owner the benefit of that insurance coverage that they've purchased through their assessments.
Right. There is no stupidity exclusion.
There is no stupidity exclusion. Well, I mean, I guess in some respects there is. But from the board's standpoint, they sit there and say, well, why should we file a claim on our policy? What do you mean by our policy? It's everybody's policy. And if there's coverage, there's coverage. We cannot deny a homeowner, regardless of how dumb they are, right, or whatever they did to cause the loss. If they have coverage, if they have a benefit from this product, we can't legally deny them the benefit of what they've paid for.
It's so interesting, though. The board members sometimes get elected because they want to become the gatekeeper. They want to make sure that those claims don't get submitted under the master policy. And we say, again, they have helped pay for it. They're entitled to the coverage. And, and it's really patently unfair to not allow them and presents a liability exposure for the board.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you ever have experience, let me just ask you this, gentlemen, where the board will be and they say, no, we don't want to file a claim, and the carrier will listen to what the board says?
Well, no, the carrier does not listen to what the board says. Thankfully, because we like to tell them, a property claim is finite. You know how much it's going to cost to repair that kitchen, to repair that bathroom. But a liability claim is not finite. And that'll kind of lead us in, why could that lead to a liability claim?
Well, it could lead to a liability claim if the association then was negligent by not tendering the claim and not letting the association's carrier step in and actually perform the repairs. So there are situations where, liability might come into play if the homeowner was negligent, but that's a secondary issue from the standpoint of a property damage policy, at least to my understanding.
But even beyond that, I guess my point was that, if you prevent the unit owner from collecting on their own personal lines insurance, then you could end up with a liability claim because you're preventing them from collecting under the first party property law.
Absolutely. So, when I was first in the industry, I saw this less. I'm seeing it more now because we're seeing these personal lines carriers that are getting more savvy. So community managers that are listening to this right now, they might have dealt with a situation where there was a loss damage was sustained to the homeowner's unit. And we tell the homeowner, no, file a claim with your individual lines, your personal lines carrier. And they say, no, the carrier is not going to step in and do anything because apparently they say our association's carrier is quote unquote primary. What does that mean? Well, it means that the association's policy is supposed to be used first, right? Especially under a walls-in situation. So if the personal lines carrier of the individual homeowner, they're getting more savvy now, they're saying we're not going to step in because our insured, this homeowner, is paid assessments towards the premiums on the HOA's policy, and the HOA's policy is supposed to be used first. It's primary. If there's anything that they do and there's money that's left over, there's repairs that are still need to be made, that's the point in time where we as the personal lines, the individual line carrier will step in and help our insured, but the association's policy needs to be involved.
We think there's such a better way to address this exposure, and that's by managing it with a higher deductible. Rather than being a gatekeeper, manage a higher deductible and have a deductible handling procedure that really determines when and where the unit owner will be responsible for the deductible.
Yeah, that's part of the water damage procedure policy that we'll get into. But, we get the question a lot, what does that mean that it's primary? Who decided that? And
well, the pressure actually became from the lenders in the 70s and early 80s.
Right.
Fannie Mae, Ginnie Mae, Freddie Mac, all three were really concerned about making sure that there was some coverage protecting their collateral that they were lending on. And so they determined that by making the master policy primary, they knew that policy was going to have to pay first. And if there was an HO6, and by the way, for years, they never even relied on the HO6. They didn't even know if their lender or their borrower was getting coverage for the individual unit. They were relying on the master policy solely for their collateral. And for that reason, they had to have it primary.
Yeah. So just back to your initial point, Ryan, the idea of maintenance responsibility versus insurance coverage. When you're in a water damage claim scenario, who's responsible for what really doesn't matter. It's whether or not there's coverage for it. So if the homeowner was at fault, if the association was at fault, that's immaterial from the standpoint of actually filing the claim initially. The carrier is going to take a look at what the situation is and to determine whether or not there's coverage. And that's why I think that a lot of HOA insurance policies are being underutilized. A lot of times, I think, for fears by the elected leadership, the boards of directors of these associations that are unfounded. And I think a lot of times they do this. We don't want to file claims on our policy because we're worried about increased cost of insurance. So instead of us filing a claim, what we're going to do is we're going to step into the role of an insurance carrier and start having our community manager go out there and make repairs to individual units, which in my experience makes the association spend multiples more money than they would if they were actually using their insurance policy the way that they should.
And then if they're acting as the carrier and they're granting coverage to one owner and not the next door neighbor for the same reason, you can get into a whole nother kettle of fish.
Absolutely.
Now let's take that same loss scenario though and say that the pipe inside the wall broke. All right. So the pipe inside the wall breaks. That's the HOA common area. They're required to maintain, repair, replace that. They submit the loss to the carrier, but for whatever reason, the claim is denied. Should the association automatically pay to repair the unit owner's property?
That's a great question. And I think my answer to this might ring true with some people's perspective on this. Some people might have a different feeling because they just look at the equity and the emotion of it. It's very difficult for the association to guard against potential water damage claims, right? To say that the association was at fault. Well, let me back up. This is the premise. If the pipe in the wall is something that the association maintains and repairs, it's an association component, and that thing leaked and it caused damage to my unit, the association then has to make me whole, right? It has to not only fix the leaking pipe, but it has to restore all the damage that was caused to my unit. After all, it was quote unquote your pipe.
Pay for you to live somewhere else while it's being fixed, etc.
All that good stuff, exactly. And if you were to accept that, the idea is, okay, well, to accept that understanding, that proposition, then you would basically be saying that the association was negligent. It breached its duty. I could see if an association is doing some plumbing work and it sends its vendor in there and the vendor causes a problem, yes, there's actionable negligence, right? But a deteriorating piping infrastructure fails, not through any fault of the association. And what's the alternative? Are we to tell the homeowner, yeah, it's our fault because we should have adopted some sort of scheme where every 3 months or 6 months we go inside your unit, punch a bunch of walls in the hole, look around and make sure everything's not leaking and then seal the thing back up? We can't do that. So the only way that we can guard against this risk is through purchasing insurance. If insurance is available, we're going to utilize that coverage that's available. If it's not available, what then? Do we as an association step in and fix your unit? My position is absolutely not. You as a homeowner are obligated to maintain and repair your separate interest, your unit. We're obligated to maintain and repair the common area. That's what we're going to do. If there's insurance coverage that's available, we'll utilize that coverage. But if it's not available, it doesn't mean that the association now has some compassionate or ethical obligation to basically fix your unit and go in there and do that. That's you as an individual owner's responsibility. And that's why you as an individual owner should purchase insurance covering everything that the association's carrier doesn't insure.
I don't disagree with that set of facts, but there are circumstances where boards just frankly are being negligent, where the plumber has said the water pressure coming in from the street is just way too high for this building. We need a pressure regulator. Or these risers are failing regularly. We need to replace these risers, and the board doesn't take the action to do that. Similarly, on the solid waste side of the equation, if they come in and say, look, we've got a tree root issue and we need to be aggressive and do it every 4 months, and the board says, no, have that in our budget. We'll do it when we get to it.
Yes.
I mean, those type of scenarios I have seen played out. And in those circumstances, I feel like the board really is responsible for maintaining the issue and for dealing with the deductible. I do not think they're responsible for putting the owner out elsewhere.
Oh, for paying for relocation costs? Yeah, the problem is, and I get that, right? Because now it's not necessarily a property damage claim, it's more of a liability claim. The association's leadership did breach a duty because it was on notice. It knew that these pipes were leaking like a sieve, and we should be doing a repipe project, but they've kicked the can down the road.
They just didn't take reasonable steps.
Exactly. So in order to settle or to mitigate a potential liability claim, yes, the association might step in and agree to do something. The situation that I see play out, though, that ends up acting horribly is where the association says, okay, we'll step in and we'll repair the unit. And even in the case where the association should assume some responsibility, maybe you might pay something to the owner, just like an insurance carrier would. We're going to pay you something in exchange for a release. What they do instead, and this is where I think is just a monumental mistake, is they go in there and say, no, we're going to have our vendors, the association's vendors, go in there and start repairing or replacing the flooring. And that never works out well, because once the homeowner starts having their flooring replaced, all of a sudden, in our experience, they leverage that into getting their entire unit remodeled. And now you're putting your association's managing agent and an attorney in a position that they never really should have been to begin with.
Which brings up an important point. I think that they should never admit any kind of fault.
No.
Only the adjuster can make that determination. Don't admit any kind of fault. Just collect the information, send it on to your insurance broker. Let them submit it to the carrier. The adjuster will make that determination. And two adjusters could have a different determination on the exact same loss.
Yep, they absolutely could. So yeah, in the rare minority of situations where a board has been negligent and you want to guard against a potential liability claim, yeah, the association might have to do something. But your general run-of-the-mill tree root intrusion or water damage claim situation, just because there's no insurance coverage or because a claim isn't filed, I don't think that the association should step in and start acting as an insurance carrier and say, okay, now we are going to, for our own good motives or well-intentioned beliefs, that we're going to fix your unit, homeowner, because we feel sorry for you. I think that is honestly a monumental mistake. It usually plays out very poorly.